Hi, everybody, and welcome to Big Joe's Journal. We're here in the last week of April 2021. Fourth month is just about done. And it's amazing how time seems to fly at certain times, and other times it seems to drag. But April, well, we've had spring-like days, we've had summer-like days. And this particular day, we're having what would you call a sunny day, but a very, very cold day. Temperatures are below what they should normally be, and apparently the rest of the week it's going to be about the same. And then when May comes in, and May Day will be this coming Saturday, the forecast says kind of a bad day on Saturday, but things brighten up on Sunday. Right now, once again, there's a warning out that we have a touch of drought here in Vermont, and people have been urged to be very, very careful with fire, especially with brush fire, because of the high winds and the weather that's predicted to come in, and everything being as dry as it is, it wouldn't take much effort to start a huge forest fire here in the state. So we'll just see, it's been up and down April. Good weather, poor weather, danger weather. We were saturated with rain just a few days ago, and here they are now talking drought already, as that water's quickly drained into the ground. And, resupplied some of the wells around here that were getting a little bit dry. Big concern for people that have boats on Lake Champlain is that with the lack of snow that we had this winter and the runoff, usually the runoff from the mountain pumps that water into Champlain. But problem is Champlain has not reached the peak level that it usually does around this time of year. And chances are the summer goes on, we have evaporation and all that sort of thing, that the water level is going to get lower. Contrast that with Washington, D.C., where climate change is starting to show a little effect. The fact is that the Potomac River is unusually high for this time of year, and the tidal basin in Washington, which is one of the tourist attractions down there, is higher than expected. In fact, it's overflowing a bit. And the prediction seems to be that if we don't get things under control down there, that some of our national monuments are going to be floating on the water, particularly the Lincoln Memorial and some of those other memorials around the tidal basin. Well, looking back, if this young nation had environmental laws in effect back when Washington, D.C. was built, it never would have happened. Because Washington, D.C. was built in an area between Maryland and Virginia on a very, very swampy area. It's a big problem down there with malaria and mosquitoes and everything else. But there weren't any environmental rules, and there were just the 13 colonies. The country had just started expanding across the Alleghenies. And so the city of Washington was built, the District of Columbia. And right now they're seeing the effects of being primarily located in a basic wetland area. Also, of course, there's a move now to make Washington, D.C. the 51st state. Every once in a while this crops up, and justly so, because the full-time residents of Washington don't have all the rights of an American citizen, especially when it comes to voting. They have a representative in Congress, but They're regarded the same as Puerto Rico and some of our island possessions in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. And they would like to become the 51st state. And I think eventually it will happen. Probably not right away, but say within the next 4 or 5, maybe even 10 years, it will happen. Well, getting back to local things, the trial over the George Floyd murder is over. And now we await the sentencing. I had over the weekend, a long visit with a great nephew of mine who is a police officer in Portland, Maine. And he mentioned the fact that when George Floyd was murdered, there were demonstrations even all across the country. But there was a large demonstration in Portland, Maine, in front of the police department up there. But he said it was mostly people, Black Lives Matter people, and a few folks out shouting and getting their frustration out after being cooped up with the coronavirus for so long. And there was no serious damage or any serious property damage done in Portland. My great nephew with the Portland Police Department works in a section of town where there's a lot of drug traffic going on, a lot of domestic abuse and child abuse and stuff like that going on. But he's a young guy. He's been with the Portland PD now about 3 years. And, excuse me. And also, I'm in violation here. Come to think of it. Sometimes you get old, you don't think of these things. You should, I should. But sometimes old age, you forget what you should do. And I forgot this coming in, so I'm glad I was able to take care of it. But with this Floyd case, had times been normal, this case would have caused a lot of concern, but it would not have been the huge, not only national, but worldwide riots that occurred. But due to the COVID-19 virus and the stay-at-home orders and schools shutting down, colleges sending the kids home, and people being more or less cooped up, restaurants closed, theaters closed, people not being allowed to get out and participate in society and in recreation. It was going to take something to fire off all these demonstrations. And the way I look at that situation, it was like a powder keg with a fuse. You light the fuse, and it was the murder of Mr. Floyd that lit the fuse. Boom, everything comes apart, and people are out demonstrating. Well, chances are, about 90% of the people demonstrating really didn't give a hoot about Mr. Floyd, but they were taking out their frustration at being cooped up for so long, not being allowed to associate with family and relatives and friends, and lack of parties. And it just took off worldwide. It was the powder keg that started these huge demonstrations. And we've seen it continuing on spring break. When these college kids take advantage of spring break, go to Florida, go to California, get together on the beaches, party, and there you go. This virus keeps spreading. You know, to me, it's like a snake. It props up in one part, you get it under control, and then it seems to crop up in another part. Different areas of the country become the epicenter of this thing. Lately, it's been hitting rather hard in the upper Midwest. Michigan is now the epicenter of this virus in the United States. And I think it was, maybe it was on 60 Minutes yesterday, or maybe some other news program. India. The hospitals over in India are so full, they don't have any more beds. And the virus is spreading like crazy. And the government in India is doing very, very little to try to get it under control. These large gatherings that various faiths have in India, you know, the bathing in the Ganges River and all that sort of thing, they're coming together. There's no precautions such as this or any other idea of a separation. And this COVID-19, of course, in India spread like crazy. And it's cropping up again in Eastern Europe. Russia, we don't know. Russia closes off, or tries to close off their negative points to the rest of the world. And in some ways, they're rather successful. But it is here with us, and it's going to be here with us for quite a while. And as we have the summer of 21 coming up, people are saying, well, when are we going to be back to normal? The question is, what is normal? Is it ever going to get back to the regular normal? There's talk now, they're saying a virus shot is going to be like the flu shot. You get one every year. Get a booster shot every year. In some cases, there's some questions about the effects of these immunization shots. I'm trying to think of some of them there. For example, the Johnson & Johnson. Supposedly 2 people have died from having that shot. The blood clots that certain women under the age of 50, I think it's 18 or 19 women had very, very serious blood clots. And I don't know, was that 19, the 2 that died are counted in the 19 or not, but as far as they know, there are 2 gone. Mandura, people say, you know, you get the first shot, the after effects are you get a lot of swelling, you lose the use of your arm for a while, and the second shot, they say, is even worse. I had the Pfizer shots. First one didn't bother me at all. And the second one, my shoulder was a little sore for about a day. But it's rather interesting how these various inoculations are working. Well, of course, the CDC has just said, well, okay, we can go ahead with the Johnson shots, even though it's causing these blood clots and so forth. The benefits outweigh the disadvantages. Well, that's fabulous looking at it overall, but it's not so good for the person that's going to get the shot that is going to suffer the blood clots and maybe lose their lives. It's not so good for them. Sometimes, you know, you kind of look at these government regulations and you try to figure out what's the reason behind it. What's the thinking going on behind it? You know, basically, as human beings, we're all social animals. Hermits are very, very rare. And usually a person that lives as a hermit, wants to get away from society, so forth and so on. You say, well, you know, it's an unusual individual, probably an introvert, so forth. But basically, we're all social animals. We have to relate with one another, one way or another. And this pandemic, putting everybody in quarantine, and all the rest of it, in many cases, it's had negative effects, but the big effect, if everybody adhered to it around the world, would probably get this thing under control. But we know that's not going to happen. Things are starting to open up a little bit. In California, I understand there's going to be a vote for a recall of the governor. And the person running against them is the former Bruce Jenner, who was an Olympic champion as a male and is now a female. And what's she call himself or herself or whatever it is? She's running for governor of the state of California, so we'll just have to see how that plays out. Well, getting back to the Floyd situation, he was convicted, of course, in all three charges. Not Mr. Floyd, of course, because he was deceased. But the officer that killed him, of course, was convicted on all three charges. And you look at that and you say, with all the publicity and with everything that went on in connection with this, how are they able to find 12 jurors who were impartial? I would say it'd be next to impossible. You'd have to be a hermit to come out and say, oh, don't know anything about it, I can be impartial, so forth. And I really wonder how they selected that kind of a jury. The defense, of course, is always allowed, when they're picking a jury, the defense is always allowed the opportunity to reject a juror whose mind is already made up or is probably leaning more in favor of the prosecution. As it were, they were able to get a jury of about 7 men and 5 women, something like that. But how could they find 12 impartial jurors? I often wondered about that, you know, and said, well, you can't have a jury. The only way you can do it is have a trial where the judge alone makes the decision. But that would have been appealed and probably downturned by the defense. They would have required a jury. But somehow or another they got one. But were these people totally uninformed? I don't see how they could be. You know, you have to be living on another planet to not have been aware of what was happening in the demonstrations that were going on, and not only in Minneapolis, but all over the world. You know, Mr. Floyd was no angel. I know he's been depicted, there's a big mural out there, it shows him with angel wings and all that. He obviously was no angel. He was addicted to drugs. He had a wife and children in Texas. In Minneapolis, he had a girlfriend. And I really think the state of Minnesota should have called in a investigative police unit from another state, from Michigan or from Wisconsin or Illinois or Iowa, and really looked into that case. Say, why was Mr. Floyd murdered? Why? Well, I have my own theories on that. You know, those two men knew each other. Mr. Floyd worked at a restaurant, or a nightclub, I guess. And I can't think of his name right now, but he was the bouncer. The police officer was the bouncer. And they'd worked there for a number of years, so they both knew each other. And yet it was pretty obvious when Floyd was down, handcuffed, couldn't breathe, that the officer meant to kill him. It was an intentional homicide, an intentional murder. He was a trained police officer. You know you don't put somebody down like that and cut off their breathing. You know, it's just a matter of time before they're going to suffocate and die. And he knew that. He knew that. You use that kind of a takedown, you don't keep your knee on somebody's neck more than a minute and a half at the most, 2 minutes at the most. But he kept it there for over 9 minutes. So you say, why would he want to kill him? What was the motive? You know, in every case where you look at these shooters that go in and shoot up a theater or go into a store or whatever, a revenge motive, or somebody say that has been laid off from a job and they go back to where they work and kill off some of their fellow workers. You always look for the motive. And what was the motive in Mr. Floyd's murder? Well, I'll tell you quite frankly, I think it was a woman. I think they were both hitting on the same woman. And, well, the officer at that time found a way which he thought would clear him. He could say, well, he was resisting arrest and I had to do it and so forth. And it backfired on him, as it should have. I think he eliminated the competition. That was his idea, to eliminate the competition. And I think that was the motive behind it. Well, when the sentencing comes up, I think, and I'm not sure now, Minnesota, I don't think they have a death penalty, which means that this individual will spend the rest of his life behind bars. And being having been a police officer, he's going to be kept in isolation for his own protection. If he were out in the general prison population, chances are he wouldn't last very long. Whoever stuck him and took out his life would be a hero in some parts of the community. And I think that's the sentencing he's going to get. He's convicted on all 3 charges, and I don't see how the judge can say, all right, we'll give it 15 years and, you know, something like that. I think it's going to have to be, when you put all 3 charges together, and they'll probably have to be served consecutively, one after the other, that he will die in prison. No question about that. But you know, it's a rather sad state in our country that here you have that situation. You have shooting in Georgia, and also, of course, in a suburb of Minneapolis, you had the lady police officer who made a mistake. She thought she'd drawn her taser. Instead, she'd drawn her pistol and shot a young man. Now, she's probably going to do jail time. I'm sure she was a very good person. I wouldn't doubt it for a minute that she was a very good person. She made one horrible mistake. And when you're in that kind of business, you can't make those kind of mistakes. I mean, you know, wear a taser on one side, your weapon on the other. In an emergency, you know which weapon you go for, where you go first. You go for the taser first. But she didn't. She got mixed up, fired a fatal shot. It's going to define the rest of her life. We look at a overall situation now, the summer coming up, and looking at the political scene. President Biden has come up with some very, very ambitious programs, and some of them hark back to the days of Franklin Roosevelt, improving the infrastructure, for example, trying to pull the country back together. He's got a tough task ahead of him, and he's got a tough row to hoe in Congress. With 50-50 in the Senate, and only the vice president to cast a tie-breaking vote, chances are that much of his program, as ambitious as it is going to have to be cut back a bit. And there are going to have to be compromises made. There's no question that the programs he's put in are needed. They're desperately needed to get us back on track. And whether they will happen, well, back in the 30s, Franklin Roosevelt faced the same thing. His first 2 years in office, he was looking at a Republican Senate, and this time the Republicans had a majority. It was 1934 when Congress, both houses of Congress were controlled by Democrats, and he was able to push his program through. And I think you got the same thing here with Mr. Biden, that these first 2 years, he's probably going to have to tread water and try to compromise. And we'll see how the country views his programs in 2022, when a big push, the Democrats can increase their control in the House and also get a definite majority in the Senate. You get that, and I think the Biden Reconstruction program is going to go sailing on through. And as I said before, it's something, you know, that the country needs. Our infrastructure, we need improvements to our highways, our airports, our rail lines. As you know, here in Vermont, we're looking at Amtrak coming back on both sides of the state and expanding a little bit, Ethan Allen, not only ending in Rutland, but going on up to Burlington. And that will give the Burlington area two sources of Amtrak, because the one coming up the east side of the state, of course, as you know, cuts across the Winooski Valley, goes up through Essex and up into St. Albans. So the folks in the Burlington area, if they want to take Amtrak, they're going to have a choice. They need to go out to Essex and take that one, which will go all the way to Washington, D.C., or they can take the Ethan Allen and wind up in New York City. Well, with that, we come to the end of another program. May Almighty God in His wisdom continue to bless these United States of America. Have a great week, everybody. Spring is coming.